The morning sun stretched long fingers across the canyon walls, painting the rocky earth in shades of amber and rust. Samuel Garrett crouched behind a boulder, his weathered hands gripping a rifle that had seen too many dawns like this one. The metal was cold against his palms, cold as the hunger that had been gnawing at his belly for 3 weeks now. Below him, in the narrow gulch where Willow Creek carved its way through the mountains, a lone figure worked a claim that should have been abandoned months ago. The miner moved with the methodical patience of a man who had found something worth staying for. His pick rang against stone in a rhythm that spoke of certainty, of purpose. Samuel watched the way the stranger's shoulders worked beneath his torn shirt, the way he paused now and then to wipe sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. There was something familiar in that gesture, something that stirred a memory Samuel couldn't quite grasp, like smoke dissipating before he could catch its scent. 3 months had passed since Samuel's own claim had played out, leaving him with nothing but empty pockets and the bitter taste of failure. He had wandered these mountains like a ghost, sleeping in abandoned mine shafts and eating whatever he could hunt or steal. The gold fever that had once burned bright in his chest had cooled to something harder, more desperate. It was no longer about striking it rich. It was about survival, about the next meal, about proving to himself that he wasn't just another broken dreamer who had come west to die. The stranger below had built himself a small shelter from pine boughs and canvas, the kind of temporary home that spoke of a man who expected to move on soon. But the pile of dirt beside his digging told a different story. This was no casual prospecting. This man had been here for weeks, maybe months, working the same spot with the dedication of someone who knew exactly what lay beneath the earth. Samuel's stomach clenched, and he pressed his hand against his ribs where they showed too clearly beneath his skin. When had he last eaten a proper meal? When had he last felt the weight of gold dust in his palm, the promise of a future that stretched beyond the next sunrise? The stranger's camp looked well supplied. There would be food there, and coffee, and perhaps enough gold to buy passage to somewhere warmer, somewhere a man could start over without the weight of his failures pressing down on him like the mountain itself. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and something else, something that made Samuel's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. It was the smell of home, of childhood, summers spent fishing in streams not unlike this one, of his mother's kitchen where she would fry trout in an iron skillet while his father told stories of the old country. But that life belonged to someone else now, someone who had died slowly over the past 5 years of disappointment and hardship. He thought of his brother William, left behind in Pennsylvania with promises that Samuel would send for him once he'd made his fortune. How many letters had gone unanswered? How many months had passed since he'd had anything to write home about except failure and empty hopes? William would be 24 now, old enough to have given up waiting for his older brother to keep his word, old enough to have started a life of his own, perhaps even married that girl from the general store who used to smile at him after church on Sundays. The stranger's pick struck something that rang different from stone, and Samuel's attention snapped back to the present. The man had stopped digging and was kneeling beside his excavation, his hands moving with sudden urgency. Even from his hiding place, Samuel could see the glint of something yellow in the dirt, could hear the soft exclamation of discovery that carried across the morning air. Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. The hunger in his belly had become something else now, something that tasted of metal in desperation. He had been a good man once, or had tried to be. He had said his prayers and helped his neighbors and believed that hard work and honest dealing would see him through. But the mountains had taught him different lessons, had shown him that goodness was a luxury he could no longer afford. The stranger was alone. There would be no witnesses, no one to tell the story of what happened here, except the wind and the stones. Samuel could take what he needed and disappear into the vast wilderness that stretched beyond the canyon walls. The dead man would be just another casualty of the gold rush, another dreamer who had ventured too far from civilization and paid the price. But even as he raised the rifle to his shoulder, something held him back. The stranger had straightened up and was holding something in his hands, something small and glinting in the morning light. He brought it close to his face, and Samuel saw him smile, a smile so full of joy and wonder that it seemed to transform his entire being. It was the smile of a man who had found not just gold, but hope itself. Samuel's finger found the trigger, and he forced himself to think of empty belly and cold nights, and the long, slow death that awaited him if he walked away from this chance. The stranger was panting now, swirling water and gravel in a dented tin plate, his movements quick and excited. Whatever he had found, it was significant enough to make him abandon his careful, methodical approach. The shot would echo through the canyon, but sound carried strangely in these mountains. By the time anyone came to investigate, Samuel would be long gone, and the stranger would be nothing more than bones bleaching in the sun. It was the way of things out here, the price of seeking fortune in a land that yielded its treasures reluctantly and at great cost. Samuel steadied his breathing and sighted down the barrel. The stranger's profile was clear in the morning light. His face turned slightly away so that Samuel could see the line of his jaw and the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. There was something about that silhouette that nagged at Samuel's memory, something that made his hands tremble slightly as he prepared to fire. The stranger turned suddenly, as if sensing he was being watched, and Samuel saw his face clearly for the first time. The world seemed to stop, the morning air growing thick and still as recognition crashed over him like a mountain avalanche. The features were older, weathered by sun and wind and hardship, but unmistakable. The same green eyes that had looked up at him with hero worship when they were children. The same stubborn jaw that had gotten him into trouble more times than Samuel could count. The same scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident that Samuel had blamed himself for ever since. William, his brother William, who should have been safe in Pennsylvania, who should have been working in their father's store and courting the girl from church, who should have been anywhere but here in this God-forsaken canyon with a rifle trained on his heart. Samuel's hands began to shake violently, and the rifle wavered in his grip. How was this possible? How had William come to be here, in this precise spot, at this precise moment? The questions tumbled through his mind like stones in a landslide, each one striking him with fresh horror. Had William received his letters after all? Had he come west looking for his brother, following the same dream that had led Samuel to ruin? William had gone back to his panning, oblivious to the danger that crouched above him. He was humming now, a tune that Samuel recognized from their childhood, a song their mother used to sing while she worked in the garden. The sound of it cut through Samuel like a blade, sharp and clean and devastatingly familiar. Samuel tried to lower the rifle, but his muscles seemed frozen, locked in position by shock and disbelief. His finger was still on the trigger, still applying pressure that would send a bullet through his brother's chest. The terrible irony of it washed over him in waves. He had come here to kill a stranger for gold, and instead found himself on the verge of murdering the one person in the world he had ever truly loved. The sun climbed higher, and still Samuel remained frozen in place, watching his brother work the claim with the same determination that had always marked everything William did. Even as a child, he had been the steady one, the one who finished what he started, who kept his word and honored his commitments. Samuel had been the dreamer, the one who chased after possibilities and promises, who always believed that something better lay just beyond the horizon. And now here they were, two brothers who had taken different paths to the same place, united by the same hunger for gold and the same willingness to risk everything for a chance at a better life. The difference was that William had found what he was looking for, while Samuel had found only emptiness and the kind of desperation that turned men into monsters. The weight of the rifle grew unbearable, and Samuel's arms began to ache from holding it steady. He could feel sweat trickling down his spine despite the morning chill, could taste the copper of fear and adrenaline on his tongue. This was not how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to take what he needed and move on, leaving behind nothing but a nameless grave and the whisper of wind through the pines. Instead, he was faced with a choice that would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. He could lower the rifle and reveal himself, could stumble down the slope and throw himself on his brother's mercy. William would help him, of course. William would share what he had found, would nurse Samuel back to health and sanity. But what then? How could he explain the 5 years of silence, the broken promises, the man he had become in the pursuit of dreams that had turned to dust? Or he could squeeze the trigger and end it all. William would die never knowing who had killed him, never knowing that his own brother had been the one to pull the trigger. Samuel would take the gold and disappear, carrying the secret like a stone in his chest for whatever years remained to him. It would be a kind of suicide, a death of the soul that would leave him walking but not truly alive. The choice stretched before him like a chasm too wide to cross, and Samuel found himself paralyzed by the magnitude of it. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on the morning thermals, its cry echoing off the canyon walls like a question without an answer. The sound seemed to wake something in Samuel, some last vestige of the man he had been before the mountains had stripped away everything he thought he knew about himself. His finger began to ease off the trigger, and he felt the first stirring of what might have been relief. But then William looked up again, and this time his gaze swept upward toward the rocks where Samuel crouched hidden. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Samuel saw something in his brother's face that made his heart stop. Recognition. William knew he was there. William had known all along. The morning light caught the barrel of Samuel's rifle, sending a bright flash across the canyon. William's face went pale, and he started to raise one hand, whether in greeting or surrender. Samuel couldn't tell. The motion seemed to happen in slow time, each second stretching into an eternity of possibility and regret. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger again, not from conscious choice but from some deeper instinct, some survival mechanism that had been honed by months of desperation and hunger. The rifle bucked in his hands and the shot cracked across the canyon like thunder, echoing and re-echoing off the stone walls until it seemed the very mountains were screaming. William staggered backward, his hand clutching at his chest, and Samuel watched in horror as his brother's legs gave out beneath him. He fell heavily beside his excavation, his blood mixing with the dirt and gravel that had yielded up its golden secrets. The pan he had been holding spilled its contents across the ground, the precious metal glinting mockingly in the morning sun. Samuel dropped the rifle and scrambled down the slope, his feet sliding on loose rock and sending small avalanches cascading into the gulch. He reached his brother's side just as William's eyes were beginning to glaze over, just as the breath was rattling in his chest like stones in a leather bag. "William," Samuel whispered, falling to his knees beside the dying man. "Oh God, William, what have I done?" His brother's lips moved, and Samuel leaned closer to catch the words. "Sam?" The voice was barely a whisper, filled with pain and confusion, and something that might have been forgiveness. "Sam, is that really you?" Samuel's tears fell like rain on his brother's face, washing away the dust and blood, but not the terrible finality of what had happened. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here, William. I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." William's hand found his, fingers still warm but growing weaker by the moment. "I came looking for you," he said, each word an effort. "When your letters stopped coming, I thought something had happened to you." "I'm sorry," Samuel said again, the words useless but all he had to offer. "I'm so sorry." William's eyes were losing focus, but his grip on Samuel's hand tightened slightly. "The gold," he whispered. "I found it, Sam. I found enough for both of us. We can go home now." But even as he spoke, Samuel could see the light fading from his brother's eyes, could feel the warmth leaving his fingers. William's breathing grew shallower, more labored, and then suddenly stopped altogether. The canyon fell silent except for the distant sound of water running over stone and the whisper of wind through the pines. Samuel knelt beside his brother's body for a long time, holding the cooling hand in his own, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he had done. The gold lay scattered around them, more than he had ever seen in one place, enough to buy a new life or redeem an old one. But it seemed meaningless now, just metal and rock that had cost him everything that mattered. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows shortened, but Samuel remained motionless beside his brother's corpse. He thought of their childhood, of summer afternoons spent fishing and swimming in the creek behind their house. He thought of their mother's face when she had waved goodbye to him at the train station, her eyes bright with tears and hope. He thought of all the letters he had meant to write, all the promises he had meant to keep, all the ways he had failed the people who had loved him. Eventually he began to dig, not for gold, but for something more precious and more painful, a grave for the brother he had killed, a resting place for the dreams they had shared. The work was hard, and his hands were soft from months of hunger and inactivity, but he persevered. It was the least he could do, the only thing left that might approach atonement. As he worked, Samuel found himself speaking to William's still form, telling him about the years of wandering and failure, about the slow corruption of his soul in the face of endless disappointment. He spoke of the man he had been and the man he had become, of the choices that had led him to this moment of ultimate betrayal. The grave was shallow, but it would have to do. Samuel wrapped his brother's body in the canvas from the shelter, along with the small wooden cross that had hung around William's neck, the same cross their mother had given him before he left Pennsylvania. He covered the grave with stones to keep the animals away, and then he stood beside it in the growing heat of the day, trying to find words that might serve as a prayer or a farewell. But there were no words adequate to the moment, no combination of sounds that could express the depth of his grief and guilt. Instead, Samuel simply stood in silence, letting the weight of what he had done settle into his bones like a permanent ache. The gold still lay scattered around the campsite, and Samuel found himself gathering it up with mechanical precision. There was indeed enough for two men to live comfortably, enough to buy passage home and start over somewhere else. But what good was gold to a man who had sold his soul to get it? What comfort could wealth provide to someone who had murdered his own brother in its pursuit? Samuel packed the gold into William's leather pouch, along with the few personal effects he had found in his brother's belongings. There was a photograph of their parents, taken shortly before Samuel had left for the West. There was a letter from the girl at the general store, written in careful script and sealed with wax. There was a small wooden carving of a horse, whittled with the same patient skill that William had brought to everything he touched. Each item was a reminder of the life that had been cut short, of the future that would never come to pass. Samuel felt the weight of them like stones in his chest, pressing down on him with such force that he could barely breathe. He thought of taking the gold and disappearing into the wilderness, of using it to buy a new identity and a chance at redemption. But he knew that no amount of distance could separate him from what he had done. No amount of time could heal the wound he had inflicted on his own soul. The afternoon wore on, and Samuel found himself building a small fire from the remnants of William's camp. He sat beside it as the flames crackled and danced, watching the smoke rise into the clear mountain air. In the distance, he could hear the sound of other prospectors working their claims, the ring of picks on stone, and the splash of water in pans. Life went on, indifferent to the tragedy that had played out in this small corner of the world. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel made his decision. He would not take the gold. He would not profit from his brother's death. Instead, he would return to the nearest town and confess what he had done, would face whatever justice awaited him. It would not bring William back, would not undo the terrible thing he had done, but it might serve as a kind of penance, a way of honoring the memory of the brother he had failed so completely. Samuel spent the night beside William's grave, feeding the fire and keeping watch like a sentinel. As dawn broke over the mountains, he rose and began to make his preparations. He would leave the gold where it lay, let the wind and weather scatter it back to the earth from which it had come. He would take only what he needed for the journey back to civilization, and then he would face whatever consequences awaited him. The morning light was different now, harsher and more revealing, stripping away the romantic notions that had once filled his head about life in the wilderness. Samuel looked around the campsite one last time, memorizing every detail of the place where his brother had lived and died. Then he shouldered his pack and began the long walk back to town, carrying with him the weight of a secret that would define whatever years remained to him. The mountains watched him go with their eternal silence, keeping their own counsel about the price of gold and the cost of dreams. Behind him, William's grave lay peaceful in the morning sun, marked only by a pile of stones and the whisper of wind through the pines. The gold that had brought them both to this place glinted in the dirt, waiting for the next dreamer to come along and claim it, waiting to work its peculiar magic on another soul willing to risk everything for a chance at fortune. Samuel walked slowly down the canyon, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls like a funeral march. With each step, he felt the weight of his guilt settling deeper into his bones, becoming a part of him that would never heal. But there was something else there too, something that might have been relief. He had made his choice, had decided to face the consequences of his actions rather than run from them. It was a small redemption, perhaps, but it was all he had left to offer. The town lay somewhere ahead, beyond the mountains and the memories, beyond the point where his life had split into before and after. Samuel walked toward it steadily, carrying his burden like a cross, ready to confess his sins and accept whatever judgment awaited him. The gold rush would continue without him, claiming other dreamers and other souls, but his part in it was finished. He had found what he was looking for, though not in the way he had expected. He had found the true cost of his dreams, measured in a currency far more precious than gold. The life of the brother he had loved and lost and killed with his own hands. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.